something along that line.
Well, we got the cash in mind.
Huh?
We got the cash in
Yeah, we have.
Just as yeah. Okay. I just wasn't sure if that's how you were going to do it. Does Cliff want to move over one?
Would you like to move over?
Yeah.
You gotta switch your name tag around, but.
It just feels a little disjointed with the
Yeah.
seat in the middle.
Karen, you're the woman of many colored drinks tonight.
Huh?
You're the woman of many colored drinks.
Look what you made me do.
Okay. Hello. We're going to call this meeting to order. It's 7:32. If you could, wait, we have, yeah, if you could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Please note for the record that all council members are present except for Council Member Conway.
Okay. City Attorney, can you please report out, or I guess it would be Clay, right? Report out from closed session.
City Council held a closed session to discuss upcoming labor negotiations. No direction was provided.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Just make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on. That brings us to oral communications number 1. I do have a number of slips. Okay, Michelle, come on up. Okay.
I want to invite everybody to come on Saturday morning at 9:45 to the base of Owl Canyon on Quarry Road. We are having a trifecta. We are doing planting, we are doing broom pulling, and we are doing garbage pickup around that area and up on the slopes there. So please come. It's a mountain watch event that Open Space and Ecology is participating in and helping to support. So it's an area that needs attention. It's the perfect planting season. We're going to do it rain or shine. Lightning and thunder is sketchy, but rain or shine. So please come and participate. It's a perfect time to pull broom because the ground is wet. We have the special weed wrenches. It's a great time to plant because the ground is wet and the plants love it. And it's a terrible time to pick up garbage, but it needs to be done. So please, everyone, come. 9:45 Saturday morning.
Got it. Great. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on an item not on the agenda? The rest of the slips I have, I think, are all for agenda items. Okay. Moving on. That brings us to the consent calendar. I'm going to be pulling item D. Is there anything else anybody would like to pull?
I'd like to make a motion to approve item A, B, C, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and L.
Second up.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So you've pulled item D because there was a member of the public who wanted that item to include the list of subcommittees that council members are now on. So I'd like to request to amend the minutes to include county and subcommittee assignments. Can we just go ahead and approve that as amended? Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. So that brings us to public hearing. Item A, consider adopting resolution 2019-05 to update the city's general plan health and safety element to include the previously adopted local hazard mitigation plan consistent with State Assembly Bill 2140. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. In 2000, the Federal Disaster Mitigation Act mandated state and local pre-disaster planning and mitigation efforts, and that was reinforced in 2006 by state law, which added provisions specifying that the cities had to have a local hazard mitigation plan, or LHMP, and what that plan might need to require. It also required that that LHMP be linked to the city's general plan, in our case, our safety element. The plan's been updated. The LHMP has been updated a couple times, most recently in 2015, but we have not yet incorporated into the general plan or by reference. So the amendment that the Planning Commission recommended in January of this year basically makes cross-reference and references the LHMP. There's also some text revisions of the plan to put it in context of changed conditions since the 94 plan was adopted. There's one specific change that needs to be made. We found out on page 7. There's some out-of-date language, so I'd like to make a couple of changes for the record. Page 7, program 148B, subsection 6, it references community emergency volunteers. The term that is now currently used is Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT. So we'd want to make that strike the current language and replace it with CERT. And then there was a typo on subsection 10, the word in relationship to the school district to plan for the provision of emergency services, not FAR. So from FAR to FOR. And with that, there was other sort of discussion at the Planning Commission. There was a discussion the next time the LHMP is updated, a recommendation that it be subject to CCAG review and approval or consideration. Again, the LHMP is a regionally sponsored and prepared program sponsored through the county Office of Emergency Services, but each city has to adopt it independently, as the council did. So we don't really see necessarily a lot of value added by directing it to CCAG, but that's certainly if something you wish to recommend or direct next time the LHMP is updated, that's your prerogative. With that, we're recommending adoption of the resolution before you this evening. I take any questions you have.
Council questions?
I don't have any.
No questions.
None.
Okay, so that brings us to the public hearing portion of this item. I know I do have one slip regarding this item. Dana Dilworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I concur with former Mayor Miller's request that you update the hazardous sections of our general plan with current maps, with our current knowledge of hazardous areas. I am concerned that in Section 2, Chapter 4, Jurisdiction Profile, that you fail to mention the hazards that were discovered in the 1980s that resulted in multiple and substantial endangerment orders on the Southern Pacific Schlag Lock, PG&E, and former unregulated dump properties. Please reread development trends. It's not current. Tell the public that site constraints is a euphemism for hazardous, unremediated contamination. Your comments in section 4.4.1 that you exceed the requirement to protect the community when you have insufficient and understated maps is incorrect. Additionally, being a victim of a hazardous tree, the city fails to have an ordinance that protects the public from an obvious public safety of a hazardous dead tree. The liquefaction susceptibility map doesn't accurately map Crocker Park, which is landfill on a former marsh. The National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Map incorrectly identifies the baylands and lagoon as very dense soil. All things I have read is that this is an irregular matrix subject to compaction. That's not very dense soil. The map for sea level rise appears as though we have a seawall on our eastern border, that there would be no part of the Baylands or Crocker Park impacted by sea level rise. Absolutely wrong. And tsunami inundation for the other guys, but not for us. Well, this appears to be work from ABAG. You know, I just wonder, is Jonathan Scharfman on the committees there? What you are about to prove does not appear to have current and updated information, some of which is in an EIR which you have approved. As a body elected to protect the public's health and safety, I find it unconscionable that you would conduct this general plan amendment as an administrative rote exercise and not reflect the actual and known safety issues of our town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Okay. Seeing no hands, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You know, I have a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, John, you know, with the remediation action plan, once that is been finalized, will the results of that then be incorporated into the general plan?
I would expect it would be, yes.
Right, and then when we update the specific plan and we finalize what is actually going to be allowed to be built out there, that information with, you know, updating the EIR, that'll also be incorporated in
Correct.
amending the general plan.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question, and perhaps this could be directed to Ms. Dilworth. The liquefaction susceptibility map that I see on item 32 or page 32 appears to show the entire Baylands area and part of, and the Sierra Point and part of Crocker Park as very high risk of liquefaction. Is that not held true? So it appears that that does show that it's a high susceptibility, and I guess I misunderstood your comments that you were saying that it doesn't accurately affect the susceptibility. And perhaps you can answer that.
No, the map that I'm wrong. Wrong statement. It was National Earthquake Hazards Program map, not the susceptibility. Incorrectly identifies the Baylands and lagoon as very dense soil.
Do you know what page that's on?
That's 33.
No, I was on 33. That's not.
National Earthquake Hazard.
Okay, got it.
Reduction map.
Yep.
Or program.
Oh, very dense.
So I apologize. I'm somewhat colorblind.
Oh.
So I can't really tell what color that map is referring to from the legend,
Right.
but I would think it was the D, not the very dense.
It's actually C.
Yeah, it is. See.
Is it C?
Yeah.
Okay, you could fool me because there's dark green for the city of Brisbane, which is rock, light green for very dense, which is basically the mountain,
Yep.
and
then
this
that's
would
different.
and this would be this
This-
they're calling stiff soil, which is the second highest of susceptibility for earthquakes. Correct?
Madam Mayor, if I may, Councilmember O'Connell has the map correctly interpreted.
So it is the D stiff soil.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, and so that is one of the higher areas of liquefaction for this map.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I could see how that could be misunderstood. Maybe we can mess with the colors a little bit
And is
because it really looks like C.
Yeah, it does.
colorblind person, it's
Yeah,
hard for me to
colorblind
tell.
person.
Madam Mayor, I
Depends
I
upon
feel like we're
the
working off of
pixels
different
for your
color
computer.
copies of it because it's real. I'm colorblind like Councilmember O'Connell, and I can see it really clearly. So maybe
We
we,
have
didn't do a great
different
copy
flavors,
job
I
when we
think.
got it to you.
Maybe it could be like lines and dots and something that's like not color related. Could
Well, I mean, it really is the definition of stiff soil and what its earthquake classification is, and how this was a report done by Tetra Tech.
Yes, ma'am. They
And-
were the primary on it.
And
right.
so they came and did soil samples.
No. They took this from USGS maps and other existing maps. They just overlaid parcel lines and such on it. So this is a document that was actually approved 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so that the local hazard mitigation plan was, and so it's on a 5-year cycle. So when it's updated in 2 years, I think for both of our benefits, I gotta suggest to them that they use some pattern other than color coding because it doesn't often work, and I think it doesn't copy well when it represents itself. So I'll be sure to bring that up as we go through the next cycle.
And does that
Yeah.
seem that we're underestimating the problem with earthquakes on this, or do you think that this still reaches what the state and county are looking for in this, or the federal?
So what I think it does is it accurately represents the information that was available in 2015. And if there's updated information as we go into the next cycle, that's what we'll put into it.
When is the next cycle?
2020, ma'am.
Okay.
It's a 5-year cycle.
Okay, so just for clarification for everybody else who might be confused, these maps were not put together by Tetra Tech. These are actual maps that were brought to us by the U.S. Geological Survey. Is that correct?
So just a little clarification there, ma'am. So the underlying basis of the maps, of the hazards that are represented out there, were prepared by others. What Tetra Tech did was took the maps and then modified them individually for the different cities, because there's 21 individual entities that go through in San Mateo County to produce those. So rather than just taking a large multi-county area that someone like the USGS or such might have produced, they cut it down, they clipped it. So they retain the underlying data, but they just modeled it so we're only seeing our city when we look at it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
I have none.
No, but I do see that a member of the public is
Oh.
raising their hand, and I know we've.
First, really quick, Ingrid, I don't think the thing is on. No, the timer. So just not like you're gonna take a long time, but
I'm
just
not
just
gonna take a
before
long-
I forget.
Probably only 6 or 7 minutes. This is very concerning because in the next 2 years there will be a tremendous amount of planning going on out on the Baylands, and this document should accurately reflect the actual situation. And I don't think it's wise to wait 2 years to see whether or not they correct a mistake that's been ongoing for quite a while. And I would insist that before you approve this, that you get an accurate and correct map, because that is not stiff soil out there. That's my advice. And if to do otherwise might leave us very liable and vulnerable and not able to properly plan the next steps of the development that is planned to take place in that area. Thank you.
How difficult, I mean, how difficult would that be to just like update that in now?
It couldn't be done. It'd be lifting mountains. Because in order to readopt this, we'd have to go through, there's a reason the process takes a year or two to go through. Because when you go through and do a local hazard mitigation plan, you're doing it on oftentimes a multi-county area, sometimes a single county area. You have to have all of the entities involved. There's a federal and a state planning process. It has to eventually be approved by FEMA, but it first has to be approved by Cal OES. So that's why you're just inevitably always going to have information that's a few years outdated. The downside of not approving this and adopting it into your safety plan is there are federal dollars that are contingent upon you having adopted your most current local hazard mitigation plan into the safety element of your general plan. Now, the reality is, yes, you are adopting a document that was approved 5 years ago, so it's 3 years plus age. That's a known statement, and in 2 years it'll be updated, and then you can update that new one with the new information. You can adopt that in.
Well, that's not the best answer we can get. I think that's the most realistic one we have right at the moment. So thank you.
If I may, Madam Mayor. So on page 2, Randy, the second paragraph, you know, I think, you know, getting to what you're, you know, just stating right now, I mean, it is important, you know, to adopt the plan. I mean, you know, without it, you know, we do put the city at risk of not being able to qualify for funding through the California Disaster Assistance Act if there was.
That's exactly correct, sir. That's the entire point of it. Because the whole point is that what's going on is that from the federal level and down through the state level, what they want to do is they want to see that the city has made an honest effort, has done their due diligence to identify what their existing hazards are and to attempt to mitigate them and remediate them in advance. So that's what this did. But as we keep saying, it only goes through on a 5-year cycle. So we've identified the ones that were at the top of the list and which data was accurate and most current 4 years ago.
Right. So in a sense, this is like approving an insurance policy for the city in case, so that we do qualify if there's an issue.
That's an interesting analogy, sir. It's something like that. It's one of those things where, and I thought I was actually going to end up having this conversation when we talk later about the emergency operations plan, but there are a number of things that FEMA and Cal OES require that don't always feel like they make sense and that don't always use the most current information. But but they are requirements to get those dollars. So some of you may have followed what's going on up in Butte County, and particularly in the city of Paradise or the town of Paradise. I think it was just last week. As we all know, there are thousands and thousands of people that lost their homes, and many of those people have gone and brought their trailers back onto property. So they brought trailers and RVs. And FEMA had just recently came out and told the town of Paradise that, look, you've got to do, there's a level 1 and there's a level 2 cleanup, and I don't know what the details of those are, but there's some different types of classification and cleanup that has to be done. But they told the town, if you allow people to live on there until that cleanup's done, you're not going to get these dollars right here. So the town council had to go ahead and say, well, no, we're going to require all these people to move out. It was heartbreaking to watch. I mean, these people had their homes burned down, and now they're living on trailers there. But this is just one more of those things where if you want to set yourself up so that in the event you have a disaster, that you can have access to the most amount of emergency relief, and in this case it's from the CDAA, the California Disaster Assistance Act funds, which are the ones that usually backfill the difference between what FEMA gives you on an amount and bring it up to 100%. This is what you need to do.
Yeah. And then, you know, getting to the soil classification, I mean, of course, we all know that there's you know, garbage on the dump side, and on the rail side is, you know, debris. But below the garbage and below the debris that's at the rail yard, then you're getting to the bay muds. So is that why it's considered to be the stiff soil, because of those layers of bay muds that are below basically the garbage?
I think that's a reasonable assumption, sir, but I honestly have not gone back and looked at the underlying data for this in that level of detail that I can give you a definitive answer. But it does strike me that the 2 compressed layers of bay mud that are underneath there are what they're considering as the stiff native soil.
Okay. John?
And if I could point out, too, that this is general plan level information and sort of regional information that's brought down to the city level. is not the information that a project can rely on to avoid doing geotechnical and site-specific analysis. So it's just in saying, well, this map showed it, so we don't have to study it anymore. That's not the facts. They're going to have to study the site conditions and provide site-specific geotechnical information, and that would be part of an environmental review for any project.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can that be put into our adoption of this ordinance, that while we're approving the ordinance, that this is not at a level of detail that would override any site-specific geotechnical information for any specific area in the city?
Sure, we could add a policy, figure out what the number would be, where basically this is for general reference only. It's not intended to provide for development level analysis. Any development projects are subject to site-specific analysis.
Okay.
That would make me more comfortable.
That would make me more comfortable also.
We'd probably add that as probably add a program 149, or policy 149 rather, if that's where it fits, but then it would be to that effect.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
I do. John, so if the new maps are coming back in 2 years, how would they change from what's currently there anyway?
Well, normally what happens, the next time this happens, this LHMP, and Randy's more involved in it than I am, but if the city has, they rely on these state prepared maps, right, that are kind of very general and maybe at a higher level. But if the city has particular information that either supplements or contradicts, statewide information that's at a gross level, the city has the opportunity to customize the data. That's my understanding, and I don't want to step on Randy's toes, but that's how I understand it to be.
I guess it would change in what the change we're hoping is that it's just more clear
Okay.
that, because right now the colors
Okay.
give, that's what I'm anticipating.
Okay.
The type of change we want to see in 2 years is that it's just a little bit,
A little more clarified.
yeah.
Well, I think for me, it's not just the color to differentiate, it's the actual description and what the actual subsoil or soil is like and what they base those information on. But I'm very pleased that we can add the clarification to this.
Okay. Any more comments?
No.
It's the council's pleasure.
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2019-05, while also adding policy number 149, described by the Brisbane Community Development Director.
I would second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that brings us to old business. I still don't know that the thing is working. Is it supposed to be green? Yeah, it's red.
It'll turn on.
It'll turn? Okay, I haven't seen it, but... Okay, so short-term rentals. The purpose of this item is for City Council to consider the input from the City Council Planning Issues Subcommittee, which is council members Cunningham and O'Connell, to provide further policy direction regarding the regulation of short-term residential rentals. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. I'll do a very brief summary, and I'm sure the subcommittee can kind of carry it from there. But this issue, right now, short-term rentals are currently prohibited under the Brisbane Municipal Code. The matter of sort of allowing them or not allowing them, under what conditions they might be allowed, has really been under consideration since probably 2015. Went to the Planning Commission with no real firm resolution. The council, and it was referred to council subcommittees a couple times. And, the general policy direction from the various council subcommittees over the years was to consider allowing them under certain restricted terms and conditions. We revisited this last November with the current planning subcommittee of the council, and there was some what we took out of the meeting is some general consensus about the concept of allowing short-term rentals subject to certain sort of criteria or conditions, which are outlined on page 2 of the staff report, that allow for hosted rentals without necessarily time limit. Hosted rental meaning someone living on site at the whole time. They're allowing for non-hosted, which means a whole house rental for limited duration, requiring a set of good neighbor policies related to noise, parking, garbage, nuisance, for the owners to demonstrate the required insurance and liability obligations, provide a tax structure to provide some benefit to the city if these were to be allowed, and then prohibiting short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units or ADUs, which are intended to promote or increase the housing stock in the community for affordable housing. So those are some of the parameters that staff got out of the subcommittee's last meeting on this matter. And if the council were interested in pursuing this, if those are the general parameters you'd like to put forward, we would basically suggest that you direct this back to the Planning Commission and to staff for a more refined ordinance to put some more definition to these sort of general sort of policy objectives. And so with that, I turn it over to the subcommittee.
Do you want to go first, Karen?
Sure. So as we are looking at it now, I think the biggest concern that we had when we were discussing this was people buying properties all over Brisbane and then just renting them out as party houses throughout the city. We did talk about, people being able to rent a room in their home for supplemental income. And I think one of the things that we discussed was the importance of it being regulated from the perspective that, we weren't turning our housing stock into hotels. That was the biggest thing. Looking at what we have here, I still have concerns personally. It's not from a subcommittee perspective of non-hosted rentals for 60 to 90 days, but I'll pass that to Terry for the comment.
When we had our subcommittee meeting, I think we had a very good discussion on, we know that the underground economy is here. We know that we have Airbnb and VRBOs, and that while they're not legal right now, we wanted to find a way that would reassure and assure that they're run properly and that they aren't a quality of life issue. So when we were discussing it, we thought that people who have availability in their home and wanted to do some amount of this would be fine. If they're on the premises, it's no different than having a roommate in many respects. And so we wanted to keep that flexibility for our homeowners and our residents to be able to still do that, but do it legitimately, where they're registered, they have the neighbors have some protection, and we have a nuisance ordinance in place so that it doesn't become a problem for other residents. And so this was somewhat of not even a compromise. I think we looked at it and felt that it would be a good thing, and it wasn't excluding someone who may travel for a month and want to rent their home. And that's why there was the time limit that we need to finesse, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days out of the year, that you could rent your home on a short-term basis. So those are things that we had looked at, that maybe a quarter of the time or up to a quarter of a time that someone could rent their home as a whole home. That again was something that we sort of just pulled a number out of thin air. Part of it is based on San Francisco, where that community is putting regulation, or has put regulations into effect, that you have to be registered with the city and you can't exceed X amount of days, so that the neighborhoods stay a neighborhood. And what the time limit would be is certainly up to discussion and review by the planning commission, and then come back to the city council and the public to review that. But we didn't want to make it and keep this economy underground, because then there is no control. So it's dual-sided, and then we also felt that it would only be fair if there is an occupancy tax applied. That's not paid by the homeowners themselves. That would be paid by the person who is renting the home, for whether it's for a night or for 30, 60, or 90 nights. So that's was our discussion as I took it.
Right, and in addition to that, we used a couple of personal examples because that's really all we had to go on. There was an example close by me where somebody with cash wanted to come in and buy a home that had 5 bedrooms in it, and they wanted to use it as strictly a party situation, which was a horrifying thought to me relative to what it could do to our neighborhood. So, but at that point, if that person had done that, we didn't have any rules in place that would have precluded them from doing that as is. And with 2 off-street parking places and 5 bedrooms and a potential party situation, I cannot even imagine what that could have brought about. So the sooner we get some rules and regulations in place regarding that, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Great. Any questions?
Yeah, I have some questions. In regards to the homeowner, would it be only for homes where it's the primary residence of the homeowner, or could it be a corporation or someone who owns lots of houses or is it only for the primary residence?
We had discussed that it would be for primary residence, because if it were someone who purchased a home just to rent it, they would have a maximum of 30, 60, 90 days, whatever the policy turns out to be, the max that they could rent it out in that year. So it wouldn't be financially feasible, particularly, to be able to buy a home to rent it for 3 months out of the year. You know, it's not like you can get all your money in one shot like you're in Tahoe.
Well, plus it turns the home into a hotel, not somebody renting out a room in their home for supplemental income.
Yes, we didn't want to affect the people who were doing it to help supplement their income. And so that's our direction, was that people who live in the home could host more frequently, and as long as they abide by the good neighbor policy and pay the applicable tax that would be passed through on that Airbnb or VRBO site. Right now, I looked at a VBRO site that states that here in Brisbane, and the price of the home, let's say it's $200 a night, it says it's paying $67 a night to Brisbane on their site. They collect that tax. We don't get that tax. That listing is a lie, and it's a fraud, and it is deceptive. So that's what we want to stop, is the lies and deception.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
another thing we did also discuss was the scary neighbor thing. Quite frankly, I have several neighbors who use Airbnb, and in the many years that has been occurring, there has been, from my perspective, 0 issues, except for one minor issue where somebody probably got on an airplane at 1 o'clock in the morning and couldn't find a key. And that was the only issue in many, many years. So there's been absolutely no problems from my personal experience.
Okay. And then did you talk about like limits on guests based upon the amount of bedrooms that are in a home?
We didn't get into those weeds.
We did not. It's something that I think would need to be drilled down by the Planning Commission and really look what's appropriate for the size of home. I've done VRBO in other countries and in other cities, and typically, especially in Europe, they will say sleeps 4, and it's really a 1-bedroom with, a bed and a couple couches. You really have to look very closely at what you're getting and what they're saying, how many it sleeps. But if you're there for 2 nights, sometimes you make do with what's really not appropriate for 2 people, 4 people, whatever your party size is, group size, I shouldn't say party. But I think that's something that the Planning Commission would need to look into. And when a permit is given by the city, or I'm not sure if we call it a permit or a license to be able to do this, and they get checked, we could put a susceptibility map, a formula together to say, if you're renting the whole home, that it must have conventional beds for the amount of people that you are certified for, and say your home is certified for 2, 4, 6 guests, and you must only have 2, 4, 6 guests, whatever it is, as a maximum. So, but we can't enforce that unless we have some sort of policy in effect to bring them above ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, and I guess the
6 guests.
the amount of guests per bedroom would also be tied to parking,
Bedroom is too.
right? And we don't want all the on-street parking spots to go away because there's a lot of folks spending the night at a particular residence.
For the most part, in my experience with VRBO, if you're coming in from another community and staying in a home, you want to be part of the community. You want to have a feel for that neighborhood or community. And that's what I look for when I have done this in other cities. But you also don't stop at the airport and rent 4 cars because you have 4 people. You cram as many people into that rental car because it costs a lot to rent a car. And most of these are designed for people who are visitors to your city, not for long-term or just for a special evening. If your parents coming to visit, or families coming for a wedding, or just tourists. So I think that a lot of the concerns can be addressed when we get to specific regulations, but for me, it's bringing it above ground, getting some tax revenue so that it's not a burden on the city, and a good neighbor policy so that they aren't a burden on the neighborhood.
I would say also if it's owner occupied, it tends to be like a bonus room that's available, or like a downstairs, maybe in-law unit or something. So because usually when it's owner occupied, it's not like hosting 8 typically. It's probably like 4 or less.
Yeah, I think getting to Karen's point, trying to have regulation that doesn't create the party house. And
Or a hotel situation.
well, yeah, I mean, there's it appears. I mean, I don't have facts, so I'm just when you talk to neighbors and they say, hey, I think this house might be a Airbnb, and there's always a lot of people coming in and out, and they take up a lot of parking spaces, and
So would a roommate, though?
yeah, no, but sometimes they'll have those parties. They'll have events, and so it's just there are appropriate places for doing that, like the Mission Blue Center, and but not our neighborhoods. So, but I like where you guys are going with this, and I agree. I think it needs to come out of the black economy or the dark economy, whatever, and be above board.
Right.
And I think we can come up with some good regulations that other cities have also implemented, and they've already have gone through a lot of those growing pains that that we would anticipate we would have as well.
Yeah, I would like to see this happen sooner rather than later for all the reasons that I brought up before. I mean, if the house across the street from me had been sold to this one person for cash, for a party house, then we would be dealing with, well, it was allowed before, you need to grandfather it in for me, and creating all kinds of issues in our community that we don't have. And I don't think we've had a lot of complaints or any complaints about people who were staying in someone's Airbnb, except it was the stranger danger situation, and I don't think we've really had any issues.
So it sounds like there's some consensus here, but I do want to make sure that the public has a chance to speak on this item. And I do have a number of slips. So first is Jamie Dunn by way of Michelle Salmon.
I'm not going to ask you to stretch your imagination and pretend that I'm Jamie, but she did send an email for me to read because she's not well enough to come tonight. Regarding my, Jamie Dunn's, Airbnb, I hold a superhost status with Airbnb, a 4.9 out of 5-star rating for 265 evaluations. That's impressive. Safety. All Airbnb guests are vetted by Airbnb. All Airbnb guests receive an evaluation after each stay. All Airbnb hosts receive an evaluation after each stay. All evaluations are public. I can read about and choose from the guests who apply to be a guest in my home. Guests can read my evaluations to determine if they want to be a guest here. This makes me feel safe having Airbnb guests in my home, in my neighborhood, and in my city. I had originally tried renting out my space. I had 3 different renters for 3 years. 2 out of 3 did not pay rent in any reasonable amount of time. Their behavior threatened my ability to maintain my life in my home. They told me I should sue them or to evict them. Both are difficult to do and without heavy costs. One was hostile to me and to neighbors. He threatened neighbors. He opened my mail. It was frightening. One consistently brought to my house people that were drunk or high on drugs. I even tried a county-supported housing alternative. The renter created an unsafe situation for me and for neighbors. During the time that I had a rental, I had to take my laundry to the laundromat because my laundry is in the rented space. I'm finishing 77 years of life. It's too difficult to do that now. With Airbnb, I can do my laundry between guests. All in all, Airbnb guests can be immediately removed for any of the issues my renters presented. With Airbnb, I have never had any of those issues, and I now feel safe in sharing my house. As an aging member of the community, I find that Airbnb is manageable and safer. Incidentally, a high number of Airbnb hosts are over the age of 65 and are managing the costs of aging by sharing their space in a way that supports the needs of their lives. We are able to stay in our own homes. Who are my guests? Brisbane family members, especially grandparents visiting their Brisbane children and grandchildren. If it were not for Airbnb, they would either not come as frequently, or have to squeeze into a small Brisbane home, creating an uncomfortable situation for all involved. Older people appreciate a place that is separate in which they can rest and recuperate. Brisbane families love having their people visit while having a place to sleep and keep a schedule pleasant for everybody, with families being distanced by jobs or changes in the economy. Airbnb assists in helping families to stay close. Brisbane employees, people employed by Brisbane businesses, people going to interviews in Brisbane, people starting a new job in Brisbane while they are searching for housing, Brisbane residents who need temporary housing, former Brisbane residents who want to visit people and town in which they love, guests who wish to visit the Bay Area. What does Airbnb do for Brisbane? Brisbane Airbnb guests support Brisbane businesses. My guests frequent Madhouse, Nana's, Melissa's, Midtown Market, Julie's, the Brisbane Inn, Saigon Barbecue, Teriyaki House, Christie's Donuts, Mamma Mia, 7 Mile House, and other Brisbane businesses. As an Airbnb host, I use the Brisbane Hardware Store and Brisbane Handyman more frequently as I work to keep my property in good shape. Regarding parking, Tulare Street has been burdened by residents who park as many as 10 plus of their company cars on the street. Residents are constantly advising Brisbane police of the number of parking spaces used by a Tulare Street resident. However, Airbnb guests regularly use my driveway as well as taxis, Uber, Lyft, and public transportation and public parking. When I bought my house 30 years ago, I could not have imagined that I would ever need to share my space for any reason whatsoever. Time changed that. My use of Airbnb allows me to sustain my life in my home. I can pay for the upkeep of my home. I can meet my own costs. I feel safe. It is important that homeowners in Brisbane be able to use their resources, including their homes, to fund the necessities of their lives. No present Brisbane resident knows now what they will need tomorrow. For me, Airbnb has been a safe way of using my space to support my life. James Ann Dunn.
Thank you.
If I can just interject, that's the perfect example of what we are trying to protect here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up we have Kim Folian.
Hello, Honorable Mayor, Honorable Council members. The proposal to allow short-term rentals in Brisbane's residential zones doesn't contribute to any of the City Council goals cited in the agenda report. If anything, it erodes neighborhood safety and general welfare for the majority of Brisbane's residents with no meaningful benefit. Increasing the number of unfamiliar faces in a given neighborhood means that residents may pay less attention to those unfamiliar faces and just assume that they're short-term renters. It will also be impossible for the vast majority of residents who do not operate short-term rentals to ensure those that do operate short-term rentals abide by your draft regulations. How are we to know or prove a short-term rental operator has exceeded the 60 or 90-day period on a non-hosted rental? How will we know or prove a short-term renter isn't complying with the parking rules? You're putting the burden of enforcement onto the public and likely reducing the already shrinking available parking for residents without any public benefit, including any meaningful city revenue in return. Only the few operators of short-term rentals benefit at the majority's cost. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Michelle Salmon.
This time, I'm me. One of the things I think that a lot of good work has been done on this, and Airbnb and VRBO is a reality, and people should be allowed to use their resources to support themselves however they can, especially in this economy where property values have skyrocketed. One of the things that I don't like about that is not being able to use an ADU or a secondary unit. And I think that that's a problem because a lot of people have secondary units that they would not be willing to rent on a long-term basis because they would run into the same type of problems that Jamie has had, that our neighbor next door has had with her 4 rental units. And the situations in our neighborhood are far worse from the 4 rental units than they are from the Airbnbs in our general area. So I think that that's a problem. And really, if someone has a 5-bedroom house with only 2 parking places, that's a bigger issue. And that's an issue that is getting worse and worse with the approval of ADUs and secondary units in Brisbane, and with variances that have been given over the years to people who wanted to expand their houses and didn't want to expand their parking, like the Lynches on Sierra Point Road. Took a 1-bedroom house with a 1-car garage and steep driveway and turned it into a mega mansion and sold it for a lot of money. And so that's going on a lot, and I think that blaming Airbnbs for the parking situation or trying to limit Airbnbs because of parking is not fair. We really should not be imposing regulations, certain regulations on Airbnb that we don't impose on our own people in Brisbane, and we don't follow up with regulations that we already have in place. So I think that the other thing is occupancy tax or resort fees or et cetera. Just today, I read a really interesting article on that, where those fees are being collected all across the country. The hotels in the city, the Park Hotel charges $44+ a night as a resort fee or occupancy fee, and those are not being taxed. The cities are not getting those revenues. It is inconsistent. And I really am opposed to that. Either the price should be the price and you pay the tax. You shouldn't have occupancy fees. You shouldn't have resort fees. It should be the price that you're going to pay for a hotel or the price that you're going to pay for an Airbnb. I think that's unfair. And other countries actually, it's illegal in the EU to do that. It's illegal in Australia to do that, and other countries to add an occupancy or a resort fee or whatever they call it. So I know it's the practice here, but it shouldn't be. And then the only other thing is that it will be a challenge to monitor and be able to control this. So good luck with that. But I do think that we should have a policy, but I do think that secondary units should be allowed for short-term rentals. Thank you.
Next up, Deb Horn.
Hello, Mayor and council members. I was just writing my notes, so I don't know what to say, but full disclosure for me for Airbnb is I have had an Airbnb unit, my in-law downstairs, for a couple of years. It allows me to have my son stay there when he comes to visit. But I am no longer on Airbnb, have not used it for several months. But I'm still here to speak to it just because I know a lot of people here who are Airbnb hosts. I understand the reality of Airbnb. And I just have a couple points to make. One, most people here are using secondary units, are using their in-laws for reasons. I think Jamie captured some of the reasons. The other thing is that I do think it's important to regulate it. I don't want my neighbor selling their house to a corporation and that corporation having a bunch of strangers next door. I feel it's important to have the homeowner on site. That's why the in-law units are ideal, or secondary units are ideal. I'm a little nervous about people leaving for 3 months and renting their homes and who is minding the store. So those are just, I think it's important to have regulations, to maybe involve some people in deciding what those regulations should be that are actually practicing and understand some of the realities, maybe get a little more input. However, I do want to caution you not to make the regulations too draconian, because the Airbnb will still go on. It will maybe not be on that site. It may be on Craigslist. Who knows? So it's better just to have it be reasonable, above board, and legitimate. Regarding parking, I do want to say that most people who come take Uber, take public transit, bring one car. My neighbor across the street, nice couple, they had a baby, they moved to a different place. Now there's 4 single people living in their home, and they all have cars, all 4 of them, where there were 2 before, and they all have guests, overnight guests, so it could be 8 cars, and they have parties, and they are long-term renters. So I think to peg parking problems to Airbnb is, you know, a little bit like what's happening with the border, just this fear mongering, right? and not the reality. The parties are not the reality. So anyway, just wanted to give you my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next up, Prem.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I think, Prime Law, by the way, Brisbane resident. I think most of what I had intended to say about this has already been stated, but I was wondering what you have plans for as far as business licenses are concerned. Are you going to ask people who are doing Airbnb in their homes to have business licenses in Brisbane? And also, there's the issue of that people were talking about enforcement and the costs of enforcement and who is going to do the enforcement as to whether short-term renters, short-term rental owners play by the rules or don't. I think that's a major problem. And then there's one final issue on this subject, and that is, I think some localities with short-term rentals, they have some type of code by which if most of the neighbors of the short-term rental property have problems, I think like 75% or 60%, I can't remember what exactly the number is, they can make a complaint to the city. And then the city will withdraw the Airbnb or VRBO permit from that occupant. So I need to know if that's going to be part of this plan, and also, once again, an issue of enforcement. If you have most of the neighbors of a short-term rental property complaining about it because of noise or whatever other issue there may be, not necessarily that there will be, but there could be, who is going to do the enforcement? It will be up to the neighbors to enforce this. Is it the police? Who exactly is going to be doing this, and where is the money coming from? I'm assuming that when you put all of these codes into action, you're going to have some kind of cash supply to fund the enforcement, because if you don't, then it's just a joke. So just want to keep that in mind. And also with regard to neighbors complaining potentially about somebody who has a permit who should not have a permit because they don't honor the terms. I think you will also have to have some kind of method so that there will not be retaliation on the part of the short-term rental owner against those neighbors who do complain. I'm not sure what exactly that would be, but I think it would be necessary, because I'm sure if somebody is really, really a capitalist and thinks to himself or herself, you know, maybe I can get rid of some of my neighbors and then he won't complain anymore, that will happen. So I think you should think of that, keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Barbara Ebel.
Hi, I wanted to start with one question. I know ADUs are important as part of our affordable housing requirement in this community. But I also know, and it's anecdotally, but in a small community like this, with as many people as I know, I feel anecdotal evidence is important. That a lot of the people that you would most want to protect are running their short-term rentals in ADUs. And so they would be compromised by this ordinance as proposed. But before I got too far into that, I wanted to know if we actually do need to do that prohibition in order to continue to qualify for our low-income housing portion of RENA. That's a good question. That's my first question. If I could take that at the dais, I'd appreciate it.
There's no sort of standard in terms of, we normally have to do as a survey of ADUs, which is kind of self-reported. And certainly if people are indicating they're not using an ADU for affordable housing, then HCD, the state, is not going to give us credit for those as low mod units if they're devoted to an alternative use.
Yeah. So there's something we're going to have to balance very delicately there, because like I said, I know some of our most vulnerable citizens who are dependent on short-term rentals are running them from ADUs. And I have a friend in San Francisco who's in very, very bad shape and would not want to have a full-time renter, but she is making her medical bills through her short-term rental. It's very difficult, and she's running it in a ADU. One thought I had is that some of those sample ordinances address issues of density. Like they set a cap on the number of short-term rentals, or a cap on short-term rentals, how far, you can't have a permit within, 125 or 150 feet of another short-term rental or something. Or we could do it by precinct or something, limit the number of precincts. I just think concentrating them in one area is problematic. Another thing you could possibly consider is exempting people over 55 from the prohibition for short-term rentals in ADUs or something, so that the people who are really trying to hold on to their homes and in vulnerable situations maybe have a little more latitude. It's just a thought, but I think it is something that is going to need to be addressed going forward. Mm-hmm. I'm generally in favor of short-term rentals. Well, I'm in favor of people's property rights and being able to capitalize on their homes. But I'm also a little bit torn about trying to preserve affordable units. So it's a difficult thing. I think that was it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Erin Clevin?
Hello. I also want to talk about, I'm just going to call them in-law units. I also want to talk about in-law units. Looking at the proposals, all of the other proposals, to me, directionally, because I haven't dug super deep into it, but directionally they seem like the exact type of thing that people who are running short-term rentals ought to be willing to do, the kinds of compromises that we ought to be willing to make as good neighbors, as good citizens, to try and continue to get the benefit and the use of the short-term rentals, but also try to be part of a community. The one of these things that's not like the others, in my mind, is the prohibition on in-law units. As Mayor Davis sort of pointed out in passing, that's actually a situation that's more likely to be with the person on site, more like the sort of situation we're looking for, less like a party house. And it seems that the housing stock issue is probably the main issue there, which I understand and am sensitive to. But in a way, it strikes me as a little bit of a Trojan horse, as both Deborah and Barbara have pointed out. Again, I don't have statistics either, but anecdotally, I think it's fair to guess, to make an educated guess, that a large percentage of the people in Brisbane and in general who are taking advantage of short-term rental are doing so in an in-law unit. It's almost the ideal situation for it. And so you may have a circumstance where you've created a regulation that seems like a good common sense regulation that reasonable people ought to be willing to work on, but that the practical effect is that a large swath of the people who are using Airbnb are actually cut out. They still have the unit. If the point is to put pressure on them, and it would be economic pressure on them to put that unit on the market as a long-term rental, I can understand the reasons behind doing that. But it's worth pointing out that that's not an apples for apples swap. I'm reiterating a little bit of what's been said, but I actually I want to add my voice to the chorus, so I apologize for the redundancy, but I think it's necessary. Both the practical realities and the legal realities of having a long-term renter in your in-law unit are different and considerably more burdensome. We have pretty strong renters' rights in this region. I'm actually in favor of that. And it means that when someone is renting your property as a long-term rental, they are not just a guest. That is their home. They have legal rights. Even when they're not paying their rent, my understanding is, I haven't personally experienced it, in this region, it ain't that easy to get them out, right? So I'm still, reserving judgment. I'm not trying to get into a serious missive here, but I want to point out and make sure it's said aloud that, A, that particular recommendation is different from the others in that it does not seem related to being a good neighbor. It seems more related to housing stock. And B, that to the extent that's the choice that's made, that it is not a benign choice for the people who are depending on being able to do this. It puts them in a very different and much more difficult position. And C, that may well be a large percentage of the people who actually have Airbnbs in their homes. So, to some extent, there is the potential for perception, and I frankly sort of have it, that it's kind of a Trojan horse, that it's actually kind of a way of saying we're not really going to ban it, but effectively we're going to ban most of it. So, whether or not that's the intent, I would put it out there that there is the possibility of that perception. So that's my 2 cents for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Michael Barnes.
So can I make one little comment?
Yeah.
Sure.
And this isn't on what you sent a note. I just want the public to know that we are not making any decisions on this. We are just opening it up whether we want to send this to the Planning Commission.
Right.
So
yeah,
we've got a lot of things to work out no matter how it happens.
Right.
And I want to add one more thing. The difference between an in-law, Aaron, and an ADU is miles and miles apart. We can have John at the end of this really clarify that, because we're not talking about restricting in-law units, only ADUs, and that's got nothing to do with us. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Michael.
Sorry.
Come on up.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Barnes. I'm a Brisbane resident. Zoning was established out of the police powers of the state in order to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the community. And it seems odd to me that here we have a use that is under the table, is not legal, and it impacts the community. And instead of saying, okay, it's still illegal, no, don't do it, we're kind of now saying, well, since so many people are doing it, it's not going away, let's find a way to legalize it. And it's, in my mind, as a scientist, I think of, well, if I wanted to build a nuclear reactor in my garage and everybody built a nuclear reactor in their garage, would we make that illegal? I don't think we would. So to me, this is an erosion of zoning, the underlying principle of zoning, which is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the community. I've heard some comments about how people should be able to capitalize on their property. And to a certain extent, I agree with that. When you sell your property, you're going to have capital gains. But I don't agree with the idea that we should subvert zoning in order to allow people to profit from their property. So I bought a home in a residential district, not a commercial district with hotels being allowed. And I'd like to, I liked that idea that I was living in a residential community and that I know all my neighbors. I know all my neighbors for blocks around. We have a house across the street that was home to a family of 2. They had a child and they moved away. Now they rent to 4 people, a couple who worked at Alta, a couple at Genentech, and they have parties, but we know them all. We know them all. We trust them. We recognize them. And with an Airbnb, that's not the same. You have people coming and going, but you don't know who they are. So you don't know who belongs in your neighborhood, and you don't know who doesn't belong in your neighborhood. So me, I protect my neighbors. I ran out of the house the other day and saved somebody from a dog attack. I knew my neighbor. I recognized what was going on. I was able to participate. When we have strangers walking around our neighborhoods, we know they're strangers. You see and hear it in Brisbane all the time. So I think capitulating to short-term rentals is a mistake. I think it should just be illegal. If people can't afford to live in their homes, they can do what my aunt did. My aunt was living by herself. She was going down to the local market and getting fish heads and making chowder out of scraps of fish. My mom was a little more financially savvy and helped her out. They sold her house. She moved to a different community, and she was able to live the rest of her life for years and years without any needs. So that's also a way to capitalize on your property. I think people have mentioned that the displacement of long-term renters is a problem. I agree with that. There's a lot of people who are looking for places to live. And I think it might be more important to place them in our community as known neighbors rather than a constant turnover of unknown people. Thank you.
Thank you. Last slip I have is Rosanna Lyons.
Hi. Sorry, I've never spoken at one of these before. I'm kind of nervous. I just kind of wrote a few notes, and I just felt I really wanted to speak because I'm going to make this just about me. I can tell my story. I'll try and make it short. So I just wrote a few notes. So we personally have a downstairs unit, and we've been renting it out for going on about 4 years. We only rent it when we're at home. If I'm away, like visiting my family in Ireland, I don't even want it rented. I want to know who's there. Everyone's vetted by Airbnb, like everyone has mentioned. Personally, I'm happy to pay any taxes. I'd like for this to be legal where I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm happy to get a permit. It's all good. So, yeah, it keeps people like us who, we're youngish. We don't have an awful lot of money. Aaron's got huge loans from school. And it keeps us, I'm an artist, it keeps us in our house and able to survive very well. The mortgages are so high nowadays that, it can help us afford our home. Our neighbours on Alvarado Street, they all know us. They're happy about Airbnb. Some of them have thought they'd try and do it themselves. As far as parking goes, we use our driveway. We kind of double up, and then our guests often, like I'd say 80% of the time, rent or use Ubers or taxis, and then the rest of the time they might rent a car, and they have one car. If we were able to rent out long term, they probably would be a couple. They'd probably have 2 cars. It would be already more difficult. And as far as that goes, we couldn't really rent it out full time. My mom comes to visit from Ireland. Aaron's parents come and stay, and we can't really, do that as well. Like Aaron mentioned, it would be so much more work and more difficult on us and everything. Our guests themselves are usually single professional people. They're extremely quiet. Half the time I don't know they're there. They're incredible. They're clean, they're quiet, they never have parties. I don't want them to have parties. The last thing I want is a party downstairs. If there was one, I'd be calling the police. I'd be the one doing it. So that's kind of everything. Just a funny little story. There was actually a grow house across the street when we moved in that was rented out by a normal renter, and no one even knew about it. Just thought it was kind of interesting. Someone like that would have totally been vetted on Airbnb. It would never have happened. And again, not everyone can afford a mortgage in this day and age. People used to rent out during the Second World War, to make ends meet. And it's kind of a nice thing to these people supporting our neighbourhood, supporting our restaurants, supporting town. A lot of them come back again and again. A lot of them visit their kids, their parents. A lot of them are Brisbane people themselves. I've had many Brisbane people come and stay. And it's kind of too bad. There seems to be kind of a fear element. And I'm not afraid of the unknown. I'm from Ireland. I came to live here, and I think most people are kind and good, and it's not nice to live your life in fear. And that's all I want to say. Sorry if it was kind of shaky.
Good job. Okay, that is the last slip I have. So is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this item at this time? Okay, make it quick, please.
Allowing the use of mother-in-law units and separate units, I think, is really important. It's idealistic to think that an older person is going to let an Airbnb person necessarily come and share a bedroom in their house. That's scary. And I don't think that they should have to rely on that. And so I really do think that having the safety of it being a secondary unit or a mother-in-law unit or an ADU is really important to make this workable, to help people to be able to stay in their homes and live here and not have to eat fish heads or be moved away from where you want to be. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Oh, one more.
I just thought of a couple things I wanted to add. Sorry for that. I run into people who are, I work in my front yard on my garden in San Bruno a lot, and I have run into people who are renting Airbnbs in town from other parts of the world. And I've had great conversations with them. And I love Brisbane. One of my few criticisms of this community is that we're maybe a little shy on ethnic diversity. So I think having people visit from around the world is really nice. I really like it, honestly. And also being a property manager, I want to say not everybody is cut out for having full-time tenants in your home. It can be difficult when that situation goes bonkers. So I can understand why people who, if it's their primary residence. Oh, and that was the other thing. I do hope that you tie it to the primary residence, the tax exemption specifically, so that there's no absentee short-term rentals. But not everybody's cut out to have somebody in their home full-time. It can be very, very emotionally difficult. I mean, even dealing with crazy tenants who I don't live with. When somebody goes off the deep end, it's like, whoa. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
So, during all these conversations, one of the things that keeps coming up is accessory dwelling units, ADUs. And I think that, and maybe that's not delineated in one way or another, but when I suggested it shouldn't be for an ADU, I'm meaning that someone who gets an exemption from all the regulations to build a secondary unit, that is giving the impression that that's for a rental to add to our housing stock. That should be exempt from being a Airbnb rental, because that was a permit given to increase housing stock. So when we say no accessory dwelling units, my impression was that no unit could be built to be an Airbnb, and that property would carry that exemption with it, or that restriction with it, so that it would never be an Airbnb, because it was built on the assumption that it would be a secondary Airbnb, and that Airbnb would carry that exemption with it, or that restriction would never be, so that it would never be an Airbnb, because it's built no unit on the assumption that it would be a secondary Airbnb, and that Airbnb.
Well, it probably started back in 2016, probably when those rules, maybe 2017, when those rules took effect, and they get more and more liberal, I think, as the state puts a heavier hand. And then you have the issue of what Councilmember Cunningham brought up about in-law units and ADUs. An ADU is a term of law. Those rules took effect. May or may not qualify, and then you have the issue of accessory dwelling unit is recognized by the state and what we have to do. So there could be some overlap. There may not be overlap. In-law units and ADUs. In Brisbane, there are a lot of units, second units or in-law units, or whatever you want to call them, that predate zoning regulations. So you have these areas of things that you can't prove it was legal, you can't prove it was illegal. So you have that kind of situation. You have the city that had its own regulations on secondary units before the state regulations. So there's kind of a whole slice of time and regulation the city's imposed. So I think, again, you have the ability to sort of draw a line in the sand, defer to the city attorney, that you could sort of at some point, whatever that line in time is, that if you built something under a relaxed development standard because you're achieving, the city is supposed to do this to promote affordable housing, arguably you could treat those units differently than units that pre-existed in the community and served a different purpose and serve a different, were built under separate standards and requirements, or were built at times where the city had no standards that were meaningful. So I think you do have the ability to regulate with a finer grain. You don't have to treat all units alike. There have to be still some, lines drawn that people understand, okay, if you were in this position, you qualify. If you're in that position, you don't qualify. And are there equity issues with that? There certainly are, but I think that's, at the council's discretion.
And perhaps when,
a finer grain,
if it's the council's pleasure to send this to the planning commission to work out a lot of these
okay, if you were in this position,
issues,
you qualify. If you're in that position, you don't qualify.
It
And are
could
there
be that a
equity issues with
secondary
that?
unit
Certainly
would
are,
have.
but I think that's, at the council's discretion.
And perhaps
and I
when,
don't know if that could be-
if it's
you
the
don't have to
council's
treat all
pleasure to
units
send
alike.
this to
There have to be still
the
some
planning commission to
connected
work out
lines
a
drawn,
lot
like
of
a
these
mother-in-law,
I think there's a lot of things that can be looked at by
And are
the
there
planning
equity issues
commission
with
area
that?
unit, and would have, one thing that was brought up by Michelle Salmon was a resort fee. And I don't think anyone's talking about that. It would be a regular tax that's added on, just like a hotel that's $125 a night, and there would be the occupancy tax of 11% or 13% or 10%, whatever the normal is, added to that by rote, and would go directly to the city through a reporting process, which would hopefully cover any permitting costs or enforcement costs. So,
Right, and I would assume we would be asking for a business license as well.
Okay, so I would like to wrap up this item because I believe that we have another item on our agenda that there's going to be considerable discussion on. So my pleasure is to send it to the Planning Commission. I think they'll work out all the kinks. That's not what our job is to do right now. And then I am assuming that will come before us in some shape or form where we can have the final say just to make sure everything looks good. And there will be another opportunity for the public to speak at that time. But I'm in agreement with almost everything that's been said so far. And I think that, Airbnbs are, contribute to quality of life. And I think that they're a fantastic opportunity for people to take advantage of. And I'm totally in favor. So I'd just like to see send it to the Planning Commission and let them work it out. Does anyone else have any different opinions on that?
Yeah.
Nope.
Works.
Good.
Okay. Can I make that motion, or does somebody else need to do it?
I don't think, do we need a motion?
Oh, okay.
It's always good to have a motion.
Okay. Would that suffice? Or do I need to restate it?
I think it was clear to me, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So I want to check in with the council at this time. How do you guys feel? Could you use a 5-minute break? Are you willing to move forward with the next item on the agenda?
I'm good.
Good.
Okay, great. So that brings us to new business. Consider adopting the civility policy as recommended by the Public Information Technology Subcommittee, and consider adopting the social media policy for the City Council and its appointed commissions and committees. Staff report, please.
Madam Mayor and members of the council, last year the members of the Public Information and Technology Committee met to discuss various city policies that other cities had adopted concerning what are called civility and decorum policies and social media policies. As to the civility or decorum policy, the committee was not so concerned about how city council meetings are conducted. They are very, very civil from my experience, and I think the council agrees with that, but wanted to be proactive to come up with a policy that would apply not only to the council itself, but to its appointed commissions and committees, so that those meetings would be conducted in a civil manner as well. As to social media policy, there's some concerns that were expressed that the legislative bodies, whether it's city council or the city council appointed advisory bodies, could inadvertently engage in meetings outside of the notice meetings that the council and the committees conduct. And those can occur through social media, generally inadvertently, where a majority of the legislative body would hear, or not hear, but read and respond to a position about something that would be before that committee or council. And by doing that, there could be what's called a collective concurrence reached, that would occur outside of the regular meeting process, where members of the public would know what was going to be discussed and have an opportunity to weigh in. The committee considered these policies at a couple of meetings last year, and eventually the committee recommended that the civility policy be forwarded to the council and be adopted, but the committee members were not unanimous with respect to the social media policy. Councilmember Cunningham felt that she was in favor of it at that time, but Mayor Davis was neutral on the matter. But they did recommend that both policies be forwarded to the council for the council to consider it and give the public an opportunity to weigh in on the matter. The civility policy, more specifically, it's sort of a reasonable kind of approach where the policy expects that elected and appointed officials will treat members of the public with respect and expect the same in return. The policy lays out some general ground rules in terms of how meetings ought to be conducted. Nothing really unique about those. Many cities have those kind of policies, and the idea that to put into wording or to put into written form that personal attacks should be avoided, and that members may but are not required to speak on each item. Things that I think are fairly common sense, but would be put into writing so that there be a written document that the council and the committees and the public would have access to. The social media policy, as I indicated, the concern has to do with whether or not there could be the inadvertent violation of the Brown Act, where there would be a concurrence reached by a majority of the committee or the council, and based on that, there could be a Brown Act violation somewhat inadvertently, so that this policy would indicate that elected officials and appointed officials would refrain from participating in that social media where that could occur. And so that's the way it's written, and I think it was out there for people to have a chance to take a look at it, weigh in on it, and the pros and cons. And I'll be glad to answer any questions you have at the moment concerning those items.
Council questions?
I was hoping maybe the subcommittee could elaborate a little bit further.
Sure. I'll let you go.
Okay, so part of the concern is if we have committees or commissions who are openly stating their position on a particular item on social media, and then that particular item comes before the city council or a developer brings something to us, and then it's the commissions or the committees making recommendations or decisions on a particular item, if they've made their public opinion known on the outcome, they've already established a bias. And that means that they're going to have to recuse themselves from making any decisions. That's what scares me, is that, and this could be completely inadvertent, and it could be completely innocent that, and when I did the training last year, because I'm the most recent person to do this in Sacramento, there was one example that was brought to us from the attorney who was teaching this class on social media, and the pitfalls of commenting on, there's a developer's application in, and you've got people making comments left, right, and center, and then that developer says, that person can't make comment on my application because they've made it very public how they feel about the outcome of this. And that, to me, is kind of scary from the perspective of we could have several people on a committee or a commission that we're relying on their input being told they cannot make a decision. And this went on and on. There was another thing that stuck in my mind about the whole daisy chain situation with meetings, and also, and there was one item, and I would love to go back and find it and bring it forward just as a really good example, where it was 3 weeks later, a third member of a committee made a like on something that had been posted 3 weeks before, and there was a legal action against them for that. And it was an innocent mistake. So that's my concern, is that we could get into this quagmire moving forward on particular topics where people have made their position perfectly known. I'm never going to let any more houses be built on Tulare Street. And a developer comes in and says, I want to build a house at the end of Tulare Street. Oh, you can't vote on that because we already know your opinion on that. That is my issue with all of this and my fear. So that's why I think we should be discussing this and figuring out how do we avoid this moving forward, because it has happened, and there has been an occasion in the past where I've seen weeks later somebody like something and I'm like, they shouldn't have done that. So that's where I'm coming from on this.
You guys have two items that are before us. One's more of a...
So the civility policy...
I'm sorry, I was talking...
I'll talk about the civility policy.
Okay, you...
Okay, so civility policy came about quite a while ago, and then we didn't bring it forward until now, and it's really because of our experiences understanding how other city councils operate. There are many councils in our county that don't get along, and they purposefully treat each other poorly and prevent each other from speaking or from taking a turn as mayor, and it's not an environment that's conducive to positive politics, so to speak. And so we kind of evaluated this based on that, and wanting to have something in place to prevent, in the event that there is a council sometime in the future that has those tensions, that there is something in place to ensure that they respect one another. It's disappointing that we have to have something like that, but that is the case with councils right now across the county. And also, if something applies to the council, it should also apply to the committees and commissions as well. And it's definitely been an occasion in the past where, even on our council, where people have gotten frustrated with one another and said things that they shouldn't. So, while I don't think that it's something that hopefully we will have to use on a regular basis, it is important to have something in place. Although, we did have a comment from Ray Miller, who pointed out that the city does have an existing policy, and so I would like to, I would like it if Michael could comment a little bit about the existing policy that we have in place, and then how this policy that's proposed is different or adds to that.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, before Michael starts, may I say something else?
Oh, sure.
So one of the parts of this conversation was, why have this additional civility policy when everybody respects each other? And the conversation went to, well, it's easier to write a policy before you need one. So if we have a policy in place, and nobody here is in an argumentative state or disrespecting each other in any way, shape, or form, so it's much easier to write a law before we actually need it. If we are in the heat of the moment, that may not be easy to achieve. Thank you, sorry.
There, Madam Mayor and members of the council, there seems to be two policies that that Mr. Miller referred to that seem somewhat relevant. One of them is a resolution from 2008 concerning communications by members of city commissions and committees, which sets forth a council policy about when appointed officials are authorized to speak on behalf of the city or the city council with regard to a city policy or position. While that does somewhat touch on the proposed civility policy, it really seems to stand by itself and doesn't really seem exactly on point. So I don't see anything either inconsistent with this proposed policy or anything in conflict with that. Another policy or another resolution that was adopted in 2013 is concerning the rules and procedures for City of Brisbane commissions and committees, and it lays out more procedural issues than addressing civility. There is a particular provision of that policy which talks about the reprimand or removal of a member of a commission or a committee, and the only reference in the civility policy that somewhat is on point is in section 2A(3), where it says the city council shall remove any commission or committee member who violates the rules repeatedly. Doesn't really explain how that will happen. This other policy really kind of fleshes that out. So again, I don't see any particular conflict or inconsistency between the civility policy and what the council has already adopted. And neither of those policies, it seems to me, really bear on the issue about the social media policy. Many cities have social media policies that are internal, and that includes the city of Brisbane in terms of what's going to be on our city social media platforms, Facebook, etc. But this particular policy really is addressed more to, in fact, to platforms that are not city generated. They're actually, the ones that might be on a person's Facebook or Friends of Brisbane or other types of things. That's what this social media policy is really addressed at, not to the city's internal policy, which is administered through the city manager's office.
And so, in regards to that civility policy, I mean, we should all try and get along, right, and treat each other with respect. And I think, for the most part, I think we do that. I mean, sometimes we get passionate about something, and that's human nature, and we've always been professional enough to come back, at the next subject, and deal with it, on a case by case basis. And I think one of the great things that I've been fortunate to have experienced while being on the council is that we've never held grudges. Yeah, sure, we get passionate about stuff and have our little moments, but we come back and we work together, and I think that's really great. One of the things that you mentioned, Madam Mayor, was we have this, we call it a gentleman's agreement. Really, it's a, I guess that's probably not the right word to use, today. But I mean, that's what we've called it, right? When we've had our meetings, just this understanding that everyone should have an opportunity to be the mayor, and that if you can, during your first term, have that ability to be the mayor, because we know that in some cities, it used to be just Daly City. Now, now it's, I know at Millbrae, and maybe there's others, so that they're, council members kind of gang up and then not allow people to serve in this position. And really it should, even though it's the council's pleasure to choose, but it's the people who actually vote us all in, and by not allowing that person to serve, you're really, I think, doing a disservice to the public. And so, if it's part of the council pleasure, I mean, I'd like, for us to perhaps entertain having some kind of guidance in writing about how you would rotate the mayor position, like they do with the city of Colma and in other cities where they have, here's how you do it, so that everyone, it's in writing. There's no politics to be played, and because not that we would do that, but I'm talking about, like you said, future councils. So that's that one there. And then, in the other one, the social media policy. So, when I read this, and Michael, let me know if I'm off base here. I mean, it really, it's all about the Brown Act, and just trying to make sure that we don't break the rules. And then, of course, council, I mean, we're advised not to go on social media. Really about anything. I mean, I know I guess we can say, hey, it's beautiful this morning or whatever. Campaigns are different. But basically, the work of the council, you don't get on social media. But looking at the advisory bodies, what the work that the council does is a lot different than what the other groups do. And I guess if there was something that the Park and Rec Commission was working on, that they're going to make a recommendation to the council, they shouldn't talk about that, but they can talk about other things that are happening with the city, and complete streets and safety, or OSAC. The Planning Commission, though, I think is a little different, because they're dealing with items where they will make decisions, and those, a lot of those decisions that's the final. But of course, in regards to the Baylands, I mean, they're really making, once the specific plan is redone, it's going to go back to them, and they're eventually going to make a recommendation for the whole entire piece. And then that's where I see that, this does make sense, to have that in place. So I mean, based upon how it's written, to me seems fine. I know that sometimes, folks think that, maybe it's kind of a personal thing, like we're taking away someone's rights, and I know that wasn't the intent of this. It's really just focused on, and this is what it says here. I mean, within their subject matter jurisdiction, and that's all that it's about. Am I right with that? Okay.
The only thing, though, that the example that's in the staff report is about the Baylands. And so it's really, when you have something that's so general, that encompasses so many different topics, it probably will become before OSEC at some point. They may make a recommendation on how much renewable energy the site should produce, or it's going to come before Park and Rec at some point, but it's really hard to say when that's going to be, and if those committee members are still going to be the same, And so I think that's where some of the concern that I've heard so far from the community is that the example that's given in the staff report names, if you think that the Baylands is going to come before you, you shouldn't speak on it. And so I think, Michael, based on our discussion earlier, it would be, so if you know let's say you're on OSEC, right? And maybe you shouldn't be speaking on things that conceivably are going to come before OSEC. But if there's something like Park and Recreation related that is not coming before you because you're not on Park and Rec, then it would be fine to speak your opinion on that matter. So can you give some clarity to that?
Thank you. In hindsight, the example I think that was written, that I wrote in the staff report, is too general, too broad, and I think that's probably also true with respect to the policy itself, that it should be more narrowed with respect to indicating that the comments ought to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of that particular committee or commission, so that if it's if it's the Park and Recreation Commission talking about the number of units, that's different than talking about a community park. And so, and the line may not always be extremely bright, but I think that if the council's interested in such a policy, we can probably tailor that language a little, or make it a little more specific, so it's a little more clear in terms of what might be acceptable and what might not be, if that's the council direction.
Okay. So I want to just see if there are any more questions.
I have a question for Michael.
Okay.
Michael, could you clarify what I very clumsily tried to say?
Yeah.
That if somebody has publicly acknowledged that they would never allow another house to be built on Tulare Street, and a developer applied to build a house on Tulare Street, what's the law that then says you can't comment on this because you have a bias? Is it a bias? What is the legal stuff?
Sure, that's the right term. There are some cases that hold that if a person with decision-making, or on a committee or a commission or a council with decision-making authority, has expressed or made statements or have written a document that shows a probability of unacceptable bias, that's sort of the technical jargon that the courts use, then that is grounds to have that person not participate in the decision-making process. It's tantamount to like a conflict of interest, but it's an unacceptable probability of bias, and because the person presumably has made up his or her mind before having a chance to, hear all the evidence and make an informed decision. And depending on, how egregious or how strong the statement is, it could give someone an opportunity to say that person should not participate because they really they're too biased. I'm not sure that this addresses that issue specifically, but certainly a comment or a post on a social media page would certainly be considered a written document that somebody could point to say that person is already too biased against whatever's before them, and therefore they should not participate. So the person runs the risk of having that kind of accusation made against him or her.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I don't really have any questions. I'd like to hear from the public before I make any comments or decisions on this.
I agree. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slips. 7. So if you can, everyone be as concise as possible, that would be appreciated. First up is Dana Dilworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm disturbed. I'm disturbed I'm disturbed. I'm disturbed that I pay over $700 a month in property taxes, a portion of which goes for city services, and this is the type of representation the public receives. I am disturbed that between council members sworn to uphold the Constitution and presumed educated staff, that this is a product that comes of these services. I am disturbed that the city attorney did not counsel you that infringing on the public's right to free speech and assembly is a blatant disregard of federal and state constitutions. These are privileged rights. You need to know what I'm saying. I am disturbed that you would present a policy that will require additional legal expense to codify and define the subjective terms of this illegal policy. As I remember references to a curly hair in Justice Thomas's hearings, even harassment is a subjective term. Sanctioned? In what way? For how long? On the other hand, I appreciate the civility policy for council, commissions, committees, and staff. I have heard, though not experienced it myself, that some members of the public have received unsavory remarks and unequal treatment from council and staff. There should be some recourse. It is preposterous to expect members of the public to know that they want to speak before the presentation. You cannot abridge our freedom of speech because you want control. Why are unduly repetitive remarks limited to the public when we have all sat through endless hours of Councilman Lentz's point of view, which could be considered unduly repetitive? In conclusion, I ask that you send this back to committee and delete all references that attempt to squelch the public's freedom and limit this measure to your conduct, not ours. And just that I have no comment about social media policy, but remind you that we cannot stop our president from using social media platform, but any inappropriate use of it can and will be used against you. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Michelle Salmon.
Michelle Salmon, Brisbane resident first and foremost, and currently Open Space and Ecology Committee member. I sent a letter today, which I'm going to read really quickly. There is an item on tonight's agenda about social media policy for City Council and its commissions and committees. This policy, to me, smacks of a concept called prior restraint. Prior restraint is censorship imposed by government action that prohibits speech or other expression before it can take place. Prior restraint ordinances are an attempt by the governing body to suppress information embarrassing to the government or even critical of the government or other entities. In U.S. law, the First Amendment severely limits the ability of the government to do this, so why is Brisbane trying to impose prior restraint on commissioners and committee members? City commissioners and committee members are appointed by the City Council. Any committee member may be removed with or without cause by a vote of at least 3 members of the City Council. I think that all of your committee members are very aware of this consequence of misbehavior. If you do not like the conduct of any appointed committee member, you already have recourse without passing a dubious prior restraint ordinance violating the free speech of your constituents and citizens and without involving city legal counsel and other resources at high expense to the city. So I also have questions. Are you considering this a law or a policy? Because a law is prosecutable, and a policy, I mean, what would be the consequences? Removal from office, removal from a committee, removal from a commission. You already have the Brown Act, which you can invoke it if duly needed. And I think that this social media policy is an effort to stifle free speech amongst the people who serve the city. And I understand it for employees, but I'm not an employee of the city, and I take no money from the city for the service that I do on the committee. And I do consider it taking my right to free speech I am aware of the Brown Act. I have read the Brown Act, and I am also aware that OSAC, as a committee, is asked to obey the rules of the Brown Act, even though we are not a decision-making authority. I find that this is a little bit offensive to me personally, and especially since I don't feel that I have crossed the line in this regard. I feel that several council members have in the last election by having other people post things for them or on their behalf. I've experienced personal rudeness from a planning commissioner, and also observed a planning commissioner calling citizens liars and disrespecting them. And so I do think that we should have a civility policy, but I don't think it should include the rotation of mayor. You've already set up a policy amongst the council that where you have a I don't even know what you call it, a gentleman's agreement of how you're going to do that. But I don't think you should have a policy of that, because just because someone's elected to the city council does not automatically give them the right to be the mayor. That person and the mayor is elected by his fellow council people. And I understand that there are problems with that sometimes. Clark's own father never got to be mayor of Brisbane because he had such a temper. But that's the way our city is. And so I think that we already have civility, quote unquote, policies in place. Maybe it could use a little more polishing and a little more definition, especially amongst council members, because I've seen some bad behavior. I've seen that gavel go down. I've seen a time when it should have gone down and didn't, with incivility between council members. But the social media policy, I think, goes beyond the pale, and I do think it is an example of a prior restraint that should not be legislated by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Danny Ames.
Honorable Mayor and Honorable Council, nice to see you. Hope you're having a good evening. I like to come down here from time to time, and I mean, look at this room. It's like not that many people in here, and we're going to adopt a policy and create even an unnecessary fear for people to come here and speak. I think you should not adopt this. It's quite simple. Don't do it. It's not necessary. We really have pretty decent discourse. I think it's an unnecessary thing to do. I think we all get along, and we can let stuff roll off us. If it's a little touchy, get over it. Okay? I think that's possible. Come on, nod your heads yes. Come on. You can. Thank you.
Thank you. Prem Lal.
Okay, hello once again, Madam Mayor and council members. Frame Law, Brisbane resident, and so concerning the social media policy, I'm looking at something from the program, and I'm not really sure whether it's part of that, so I just want to read it to non-council persons appointed by the City Council to serve on any city commission or committee who initiate communications. This is number 2. To any newspaper, magazine, television, or radio station, website, or other form of mass media shall not designate or identify himself or herself as a member of the City Commission or Committee unless communication has been expressly authorized by the Commission or Committee of which the person is a member. Members of City Commissions and Committees may respond to inquiries for information or comment from the media or other persons communicated to them in their official capacity as a member of the City Commission or Committee. Is that part of the social media policy, or is it something that is it going to be integrated in the social media policy? Or
this was the 2008 policy that the council adopted, and it's not embedded as it were within this policy. It's kind of its own separate policy, and it doesn't, I don't think, really relate necessarily to the civility policies before the council tonight.
Okay, but what about the social media policy?
I'm sorry, and not that either. It really is kind of apples and oranges from my point of view.
Got
It's its own thing, I guess.
Okay, well, one of the things about the social media policy that I thought I would put forward is the idea that I think an issue really sometimes of whether people are speaking in their authority as whatever their position may be. I mean, I think sometimes if somebody says, I am the XYZ of city council, of this commission, of that committee, and then goes on to say something to the effect of, and I stand for this viewpoint, that's definitely bogus. But I think especially when you have people on commissions and committees who don't really have any power, ultimately the city council is really the only group of people that has power and authority to actually make something happen. The people on the commissions and the committees can make recommendations to city council, but they don't really have any punch. So the question is, should they be prohibited from speaking as independent people as opposed to members of whatever committee or commission they might be on? Whereas, for instance, with the position on Measure JJ, I mean, we had people sending out letters to the community saying, I am the mayor and I say this, or I am this and that representative of so on and so forth. If somebody wants to indicate a position as an individual, I would say that that's reasonable on social media, but it's not reasonable if somebody says, I am this, I am the mayor, or I am a council member, or what have you, and this is what I believe in. The issue that you have, Karen, about the potential for somebody to be forced to recuse themselves based upon something expressed upon social media, I think that has some validity, but I don't know how much how much teeth that has, so to speak. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Next we have Barbara Ebel.
Good evening, Barbara Ebel. Historically, the Brisbane City Council appointed people who are passionate, and now it seems as if you would like us to choose between the issues we are so passionate about and the opportunity to serve our community. I can tell you that is not a choice I will make. I will not stop caring about those things that make Brisbane so wonderful. I will not stop protecting the environment, nor will I wash my hands of Baylands. I will persist. We have the Brown Act in place. I believe that we can obey it. If we don't obey it, you're welcome to tell us so. I can handle any of the repercussions. I am a big girl. I can even keep an open mind, believe it or not. Would you really expect me not to post anything about recycling opportunities on social media? Because potentially that's what you're asking. I mean, that's potentially in the purview of open space and ecology. If you promise me right now that OSEC is going to have input on the Baylands, you keep that promise, and that you're going to listen to us, I will shut up. Right? You're going to make me that promise? I've really enjoyed my years on open space and ecology. I feel I have made a real contribution to this community with the Climate Action Plan that garnered the city a platinum level beacon award, as well as contributing to outreach, education, planting, restoration, and many, many other projects. You recently got our accomplishments reported to you. And for this opportunity, I'm very grateful. Left to my own, I will continue to do so. But this jagged line in the sand is most likely going to be a lose-lose proposition. Possibly because I watched the movie The Post the other night about the Washington Post. I'm put in mind of Nixon when he felt threatened and committed a fatal mistake of trying to exert heavy-handed control of people and information that were beyond him, and he crossed a line. while the Brisbane City Council is being more clever and instead trying to move the line, your vote will go a long way tonight to telling us how you deal with disagreement and dissent. Who will be a Nixon and who will not? Please vote your conscience, I'd like to know. By the way, you really don't want me to have more free time. If you want me to shut up, elect me to the Brisbane City Council.
Okay, next up we have Michael Barnes.
Mayor, council members, my name is Michael Barnes. I'm a Brisbane resident. I served on the Open Space and Ecology Committee for 7 years. I served on the Planning Commission for 7 years, served on the City Council for 8 years. I don't see the need for further civil discourse policy. I think you need to have disagreements. I think back to the founding of the country and the U.S. Constitution. That was a very, very contentious time. There were lots of disagreements, and people were not civil to each other, and it resulted in the U.S. Constitution. I'm not saying that you're dealing with issues of that import, but you need to be able to disagree, and in whatever way you feel necessary. As far as the social media, one other thing. As far as the succession of the mayor's job, since I've been around for a little while, I remember a time when somebody did not get what they thought was their turn on the city council, but it's the city council's job to select that person, and if there are good reasons that person should not serve as mayor, I think the city council should take that action. So moving on now to social media policy, I agree with Michelle Salmon. I think that it's just...
Excuse us for a minute.
There's a disruption in the audience.
You may want to call the paramedics.
It's starting to become a common thing.
Okay, then.
You have the power. I think I'm reading tea leaves. I may be wrong, but it seems like this is about the Baylands. We just went through a very contentious election, and it appears that we made a decision as a city, and now we all need to pull in the same direction. And it's very clear that that's not happening on social media and or on independent websites. And so I think it's in the city's best interest that you do have people on your commissions and committees that are pulling in the right direction, in the direction you want them to pull for the Baylands, because you're on a very short timeline. We can't delay, have discussions, disagreements, and endless conversations. They need to do their job in support of the voters' decision on the Baylands, and if you have committee members, commission members who aren't willing to do that, you should just dismiss them. You don't need a reason. It's already within your purview. Just replace them. It's no big deal. It's just hard to do. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Deb Horn.
Hello, Mayor, council members, Deb Horn. Does anybody remember who said, "Housing on the Baylands over my dead body"? Was in the newspapers, was all over social media, all over online digital media. Was that person recused? There's a lot of people who had some very strong comments about the Baylands and positions and opinions. Were those elected officials recused? So I just want to ask that question about how far do we go with bias and what are the potential consequences? The other piece is, Cliff, I thought you had a good idea, and that this may make sense for the Planning Commission. It may make sense for the City Council to have a social media policy, because you all really do have decision-making authority and major influential authority. Smaller committees, smaller advisory bodies, it seems like overreach and overkill. And you will lose some of the great public service that you get here from Brisbane residents who are very engaged and may not be 100% in sync with every decision that's coming before the Planning Commission or the Council. So I don't think that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I don't think that you need to put everything in the bathtub around social media policy to the point that you will not have people volunteering, because this is Brisbane. and one of the lovely things about Brisbane is freedom of speech, diversity of opinion, ability to express yourself and still make contributions. So I think it's reasonable to have some social media policy and just keep it within the bounds that it really is meaningful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kevin Fryer.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm Kevin Fryer, a Brisbane resident, and I serve on the Parks and Rec Commission. And I'm going to speak in contrary motion to everything that's been said so far, because we on Parks and Rec have been given the talk that says we should not engage in social media in any way that would potentially put us in danger of being in violation of the Brown Act. And I realize the Brown Act was written before social media came about, and social media is a force to contend with, and laws are struggling with you know, how to do with that, how to deal with that. I also think social media can be a very distracting force in decision making. I take seriously the role that I play on Parks and Rec Commission and also now on the Public Arts Commission. I think commissioners and committee members, it's true, we don't have hard power. We advise you, the City Council. I call it more soft power. We have a seat at the table. That's where I'm interested in making my views and such known. So I've steered very, very clear of engaging in contentious issues on social media, because I have been given strong warning against it. I was a little surprised to see this social media thing on the agenda tonight, because I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing. When we introduced the new members of the Public Arts Advisory Committee, we went through the Brown Act, and in that we had a conversation about social media and take care, precisely because there are legal traps that one can fall into if you make a comment, if you like something on a thread that seems perfectly fine, grows contentious, and 4 days later, you are now in the mix of being in violation of the Brown Act. So I just wanted to say I think we do need some clarification for this. Myself personally, I like having a seat at the table. I avoid getting into the tussles that's on social media. I do read them. I see them as input that helps me to think about things if they're things that I'm involved in. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's my last slip. Does anyone else care? Okay, please come forward.
My name is Karen Klauber. However I'm supposed to greet you. I'm drawing a blank.
Brisbane resident.
Yeah. Anyway, I find this to be so ridiculous, what you are asking of us, when I find the people of this council should recuse themselves for how they have conducted themselves. Well, let me rephrase this. I feel that a letter that went out saying, the mayor has this feeling on stationery from Brisbane, how to vote on a certain proposition. you know, if that shouldn't be recused, I don't know what should. And for other people to go in the media and say this, and then all of a sudden to say, oh, well, this was taken out of context, and to bring this up, I mean, it's like insanity. Hello? I mean, we're not in kindergarten. This does not make sense. And I think that if you want a society that is functioning, you should like speak the same language or have some transparency or some semblance of communication that works two ways, because there's zero clarity here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
City Council. Madam Mayor, Meg Ankenbrook, city resident. I'm also the chair of the Open Space Committee. So I came here tonight kind of because I was like, what is this? And yes, I heard about it on social media. Thank you very much, social media. And I really thought, well, let's hear, because it's, I'm open space, and it's a committee, and we make suggestions, and you make decisions. And so all I've heard, though, is that it's kind of a scare tactic. It's like, we get along really well, which I'm so glad you guys get along and respect each other. You should. It's wonderful. We're Brisbane. So, but you're doing this for the next generation. Or what's really going on? Because I'm like, that didn't really make any sense, because that's kind of what you guys had said. Each of you gave a reason, and it was, we get along really well, but so what's the real purpose for it? I don't understand.
You're talking about the social media policy or the civility policy?
The social media policy, not the civility policy. Yeah. So, I mean, I get that, but, the crossover, you're saying that this next generation is, so I think they are connected, very much so. And that's what I don't understand, because I think we all get along, we all respect each other. I think it's great to have freedom of speech. And yes, if you're sitting here and you're going to be voting on something, no, you probably shouldn't be saying anything. If it's on a voting, it's a jurisdiction, and that's what you said. So it's a jurisdiction. So just think about it, how you word it.
Thank you.
If it's going to come to play at all.
For clarity, we have two separate policies, civility and social media. Civility policy is in the event that there are commissions, committees, or a council that cannot get along. Social media policy is not related to the future the wires got crossed there. So just for clarity. I'd like to get into discussion on this now. Anybody else have one last thing? Please make it very quick.
My comment is on the social media policy.
Okay.
And I already sent a letter. I'm not going to rehash that. But just another perspective on the effect of having commissioners, city council members, committee members commenting on social media sites, such as the residents of Brisbane Facebook page. It can have a negative impact on public engagement. So, for example, after the vote of Measure JJ, I voted yes. There was, I don't remember what the post was about. It was housing related, I believe. It's in your packet in my example. I was, a committee member made the comment that essentially the most informed, in general, the most informed voted no. So what does that say to me? I mean, what does that say to the 55% that voted yes? How does that help us move forward with the Baylands? I think those types of comments, the personal attacks on some of the council members, claiming someone has burned someone in the past, someone else is trying to, cement their legacy, that's not helpful. That really turns off the public from coming to any meeting. I don't feel welcome at a NOSEC meeting, I can tell you that right now. So it's just another perspective from another member of the public. I see that it can actually decrease engagement, if you will, from the public, sort of your silent majority that is now feeling maybe bullied and afraid to come participate. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to move on to discussion at this point.
If I may, I got a couple of questions for City
Sure.
Attorney. So, Michael, so the Brown Act's been around for a very long time. When commissioners and committee members and, of course, the council, when they take these positions, they're all, given this awareness of the Brown Act, and now because of social media, are just told to be smart, be aware of what you post, and so I mean that's part of what we already do, isn't it?
Yeah, and the policy is it's a should refrain from doing. It's not a criminal sanction. It's not an ordinance that the council would be considering. It's really it's guidance. That one should not do that. It's not written as shall, and the likelihood that someone's going to raise a Brown Act violation is probably not great, but it's just being aware of it and thinking about it before you do it, and that's what the intent of the policy was written for.
All right, and that's my next question. You said, the likelihood of someone doing it is probably low. I mean, are you aware of anyone so far who's crossed that line?
No, not in this community, or no, not in this community. I think the council and its appointed bodies are aware of it and avoid it. It's just an attempt to remind folks about not crossing that line and what you should or shouldn't do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions, or would you like to move into comments?
I have one more question for Michael.
Okay.
Michael, could you just outline for us, you've heard my concerns, is that people being asked to recuse themselves from voting on a certain issue or commenting or even being part of a study because of a bias. Can you just enlighten us a little bit for the people who don't understand potentially what are the consequences of preconceived biases by a developer?
The way that the cases have come down is that if a particular matter is, let's say it's that a property owner or developer feels that a person has sort of crossed that line with respect to bias, and the person is asked to step down because of the perceived idea that the person cannot consider the matter fairly and impartially, and the person still goes ahead and participates in the decision-making process, the developer could certainly challenge the decision, and if the court agreed that that participation was not proper, could invalidate the decision and send the matter back to the council or the Board of Supervisors or whoever to then rehear the matter, and without that person being able to participate. So that's the consequences, is that there would be a challenge, and if it's successful, probably the person who successfully challenged it would ask for attorney's fees, and the matter would have to be returned and reconsidered by the council without the person who had participated.
So do you feel that I have reasonable or unreasonable concern regarding that particular matter? Because that's my major concern.
Well, again, it's sometimes difficult to know exactly where or when that line gets crossed. And I think the idea of this type of policy is to prevent the person from going up to the line, so you don't have to worry about whether you crossed it.
Thank you.
So I've read through this and I've listened to everybody. As far as the civility policy, I think we should all behave well to each other. We don't always. And sometimes our emotions and our passions for things, you can second guess how you reacted. Sometimes you reacted badly, or someone has reacted badly, and sometimes you have to reflect on it, and hopefully we all move forward. But if it does get out of hand, it is the responsibility of the chair of whether it's this body or any of our commissions. It's their responsibility to take control of that meeting and stop inappropriate behavior. But I don't think we need to put it this way, and it should be for the people we have control over. We ask that our people attending the meeting also behave in a civil manner, but many times there's a lot of passion, and people are going to be loud. They are going to be passionate about something, and we shouldn't stop that. That's part of our process. There's a line that gets crossed, and that's a decision to when to stop it should be the chair or the mayor, whoever's running the meeting, decision to stop bad behavior. If I were to pick apart this policy, I think when you get into the meetings where no member shall speak twice unless other members have spoken, many times I may have 3 or 4 things to say and need to keep going on that point before I relinquish the floor to someone else. But again, that's the mayor's responsibility, or the person chairing the meeting, to determine when it's appropriate. So I think a lot of this is overly restrictive. And sometimes our public, when they are speaking to us, while it should be directed to this body, will make a comment to the city attorney or to city staff saying, do you understand this? And while they shouldn't expect a response, the wording can sound like it's being directed to staff. So I don't think we need to necessarily preclude that. Again, it's a matter of giving people their freedom to speak. And as far as the social media policy, I was going to bring up an example for the Park and Rec, because at first I didn't see anyone from Park and Rec, that if a Park and Rec commissioner posts on social media, "We love parks, come on, help us come raise funds for a new swing set," can they no longer make a decision on a swing set because they've expressed a like for swing sets? If someone on OSEC says, there's this great new way of generating wind and solar, and it's this new turbine thing that works really well, and post it on social media, can they no longer talk about power generation? So we're crossing a line when we say you can't speak on anything. It's not a Brown Act violation to like swing sets or clean water or power. So I think it's going way too far, and I would not support either of these the way they're written.
Yeah, so I agree with Terry. We do get along. We pass policy, but we do mix it up, and the public mixes it up with us too. that's also part of the flavor of our town. So there are councils where things are really out of hand, and it never gets out of hand here. I mean, you know.
And I doubt they'd follow a policy anyway.
Well,
I
think you're right about that. I mean, you know, you can have these rules, but then chances are we're gonna just go with the flow. Someone asks a question, and we take a break and we ask staff, or sometimes we even talk to people that are at the podium. And you know, of course, that's not what we're supposed to do, right? You know, they're supposed to address the council, and then we hear, and then they sit down, and for the most part, we do it like that. But sometimes we do talk with members of the public when they come to the podium, and we should have that ability to do it. In regards to the social media policy, if the city attorney said, yeah, we got violations, all over the place, then it'd be like, okay, well, then we got a problem. We need to have a policy for it. But if there isn't a problem, then I think it's okay. Of course, you know my position on the rotating the mayorship. I think that's something that...
You tried to sneak that one in.
You brought it up, right? And
Can I interrupt you?
Oh, God.
Okay.
Someone was searching for the word, and it's not a gentleman's agreement. It's an expectation of fulfillment of the mayorship, I think would be the best way.
Yeah, I know it is. I just, kind of going back from those meetings that we've had, and that was the word that we used. Yeah. To me, it just seems fair. And yeah, okay, you could get someone who maybe disagrees with the majority of the council, but still, they were elected by the public, and so that would be the only thing that I'd like to see happen. Right, the other stuff, I just leave it alone.
He's just covering his gentleman's agreement.
Yeah. So I mean, that'll probably be something that we could talk about another time. But as far as these two items as they're written, I would just let's let it go to sleep.
I'm snoring.
Okay.
So, and I think that's really why we brought this forward, because Karen and I had kind of different opinions on this matter, and it was important for us to bring that forward and have that be heard by the full council to see, since we weren't in agreement about how we should proceed on that, to really have the public have the opportunity to speak on this and to really allow the council to give their input. And if it was really the council's pleasure that these two things were really important and they felt that they were really needed, then obviously we would move forward with that. I don't like having laws in place that unnecessarily try to control people, and that's something that why I felt really strongly about smoking policy, and I felt people should be able to do what they want in their own homes, and I kind of feel the same way about this. I think that even if we did have a civility policy, if there was an uncivil situation, I doubt that anyone's pulling out the policy and saying, "You're violating it." And then would have, that person say, "Oh, you know what, you're right. My bad." If you're already at that point, I doubt that pointing to the civility policy will really fix the matter. But if that was, the council's pleasure, I would, of course, be happy to support that if the rest of the council felt that that was something that was important. In terms of the social media policy, every commission and committee has a conversation where they learn about the Brown Act. There's training on that. And if the Brown Act's ever violated, there are remedies to that that are fairly simple. And, if we consistently have somebody who violates that, or we just feel like we are not appreciative of the service that they're giving us, we can let them go at any time. And so I feel like that's enough. To put something in writing, I think, is just somewhat unnecessary. And if all of our committee members and commissioners know that they're taking that risk when they post something on social media, that it may come up at a later time, and that's a risk that they're willing to take. And so they should be free to do so. And, if at some point there needs to be a consequence for that, we will deal with that on a case-by-case basis. And if we can also just not reappoint somebody too, if we want to go that route. So personally, I think that people should have the freedom to say anything that they want, whether it be at our meeting or online. And I appreciate dissenting opinions. I think that provides for checks and balances, and I think that it helps me see points of view that I didn't previously see, and I think it's healthy for there to be disagreements. So personally, I don't need to move forward with either of these policies either. But I will turn it over to you, and
Well, let's see what happens moving forward.
Okay, all right. And we can always revisit anything at any time. If we feel like we need this, then we can look at it again. All right. So it appears that the council does not wish to move forward with either policy. So that brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is the earthquake, fire, and flood plan, I believe.
Yes, ma'am. This is the Emergency Operations Plan update, and this is your twofer this evening from FEMA. So thank you for taking the time there. This is an update that happens typically every 2 to 3 years. The primary purpose is to make sure that we're in compliance with the latest guidance from both FEMA and from CalEMA. And if you wanted to see really what the biggest focus is, or how this works and how this helps staff, I would encourage you to turn to it's paginated as page 54 in your staff package there, because that actually gives you a step-by-step list of the things we do. Staff has actually already had a training on this. The developer came in last week. It was January the 30th, so we had a meeting of about 24 people, just about everyone who's assigned to the Emergency Operations Center. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a follow-on specific training for each of the positions that happen. And then we're going to do a mini exercise where we're actually trying to simulate messages. Because really the point we're trying to get to here, one of the biggest things that we do in the EOC is receipt information, track incidents, make sure that we assign resources to it, and if we're short resources, to access those resources. And that sounds like it would be a simple thing to do, but when you've got multiple calls coming in, when you've got both property and lives that are damaged, it's important that we have a strong protocol that we've worked out together. So that's why we had requested, it was last year, in last year's budget, we asked council to provide $50,000 for that training in lieu of providing a body. And we've got a couple of proposals in hand right now, and we're going to go through and interview different people, and then we'll be authorizing that agreement and moving forward with the training. So I know your hour's getting late, and this is a large document, but I'd be happy to answer any questions for you.
Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, I do. Okay. Yeah, Randy, it's a great document. Thank you for putting it together. When you're out in the public, people on occasion will ask, okay, if something happens, what's our game plan?
Right.
And being on commute.org, they are great at providing these incentives to get people to carpool or to do whatever. And so, with our community outreach, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to have some kind of incentive for people to acknowledge that they got the information. That we send them information about, like, here's if there's an earthquake or if there's a fire, and we want to make sure that they got it and they read it.
Right.
And then if you send an email to Public Works or whatever, you'll get say a free space blanket or some
great idea.
kind of water ball or something like that.
Yeah. I'd be happy to brainstorm that further. We actually did something like that. perhaps Councilmember Cunningham remembers, it's got to be 10 or 15 years ago where we actually sent a little foldable can opener. We used to call them John Wayne can openers back when you were in the service and they still had cans you could open. And we put those in envelopes along with a little card and we sent them out to people. I'm sorry? P38, I believe. P38. Thank you. Very good. Wow. Now I'm shocked. I'm sorry. I get distracted there. We set the can openers around and we only got a couple responses back from them, surprisingly. We actually had one person who called and was complaining because apparently their young daughter had opened it and they thought, had opened the mail that comes to the house, and they thought somebody was going to get hurt on it because those things have a little bit of a sharp edge on it.
Yeah.
But I'd be.
Oh my gosh.
I'd be.
Space blankets, then.
Well, that way at least we know we got. I was actually happy because at least they know they got it.
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind brainstorming that, Randy, and
because maybe what I'd like to do is brainstorm and think about it. So, because really, what we want people to do is have their go bag, their emergency preparedness kit, or have their family
something that's tied to
reunification plan. Send us a picture of that, and you get a space blanket. Yeah, there you go.
Do you have resources? Because I know we did a partnership with Earthquake Bag previously. So sometimes, from working with them, people often know that they need those things, but they don't know exactly how much water, how much food they need, and then they don't go out and compile that. So it might be good to put some resources of places that have, if you don't want to, make it yourself, places that already have those ready to go.
I'm going to do a pitch. Donate to KQDD right now during their winter pledge drive, and you too can have one of those 3-day emergency kits.
Yeah.
Great. So maybe some resources like that too.
Sure.
Could be good.
Sure. I would say that we have all that information available on our website.
Okay.
I think the hard part that, and I keep looking at Ms. Cunningham because I know we both have had this conversation for many years. The hard part has been to get at the top of people's mailbox. And, and 15 or 20 years ago, it was top of their literal USPS mailbox, and now it's top of their email inbox, and then it's become top of their Instagram email inbox, and then once it goes to Snapchat, they only see it once and it disappears. So trying to get past that and getting people to understand, really, we had a lot of interest after the fires. After Paradise, you have interest, but that interest wanes after about 72 hours is what we found. It's just a real thing. People just get overwhelmed with life. So I'm happy to take on any ideas that we had even talked with the chief at one point in time about setting up a roadblock in the morning as people were going out in town and asking them if they had their preparedness kit in their car, and that just didn't seem like a good idea. I think she wanted to know if I'd bumped my head on my way into work that morning, and I might have. I
was like, what?
Yeah. Randy, you're crazy.
All right. Any other questions?
No, I make a motion to accept the EOP
public comments.
Oh, right. Sorry. I'm just really itching to get out of here. Does anyone wish to comment on this item? Okay, I didn't think so.
All right, now I'll make a motion to close the public.
I'll second it.
Oh, my
It's not a public hearing, I don't think.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So now we're at staff report, city manager's report on upcoming activities.
All right, we need to make a motion though for this. So I make a motion to accept the EOP base plan and the annexes for earthquake, wildfire, and flood.
Sorry.
Oh, I thought that's what you did.
That's what I thought you did.
Okay, well, I said to close the public hearing.
Public
hearings.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Great.
Okay.
Excuse me. 3 quick items. Just mentioned already earlier tonight that the San Bruno Mountain Watch will be hosting a volunteer planting day at 9:45 a.m. this Saturday. Mayor Davis will be having her next office hours next Wednesday, the 13th at 6 p.m. here at City Hall. And on Wednesday, February 20th, at Station 81 on Bayshore Boulevard, there will be a basic first aid class in the morning and a CPR and AED training in the afternoon. If you're interested, you can go sign up on northcountyfire.org.
And the raccoon?
Yeah. For the
That's
raccoon.
after, okay. I mean, the raccoon will be after our next council meeting, but it's
okay.
on the 23rd at 10 a.m. at the Castanis Canyon
Just trying to extra publicize it.
at 10 a.m.
That's right. Okay. Now, countywide assignment subcommittee reports.
Let's see. So Clay and I, we attended the CASA meeting that was put on by the Peninsula League California Cities chapter. And so CASA is something that was put together by MTC and ABAG. I guess it's both. And basically it took Scott Wiener's bill, SB 827. Is 827 correct?
That was last year.
That was last year's, yeah. So it took the all the stuff that nobody liked, and they put it into this plan. They even said that at the meeting. So basically, they formed this group, a very small group, to look at major transit hubs and having the half-mile radius of minimal zoning. And then major bus stops, quarter-mile minimum zoning, which is code for taking away local control. And so then they brought that to the MTC and ABAG boards. They approved it, and now they're going out into the public to get public comment. So it's a little bit backwards, right? Instead of going out and getting public comment and then having that information so ABAG and MTC could vote on it. So I have raised that issue with Sandy Wong, who is the executive director of CCAG, and we have a meeting coming up, and so it won't be able to get on that agenda, but I'm hoping that it'll be on the next one. And then Clay and I also, and then John Sawicki was also at the CASA meeting. Then Clay and I also attended the climate change forum that was put on by San Mateo County, and they have this pilot program that might be kind of cool. Of course, we're going to be doing the Home for All pilot, and so that might be too many pilots to do. But in regards to it might be something that we might want to look at in the future in regards to looking at best practices in how to deal with climate change. And if you want to talk about the Home for All meeting, but before that, so I do also have office hours on February 20th. And so I have a special guest. It'll be John Ford. He's the executive director of Commute.org. I'm currently the chair of the Commute.org board. And so we'll be talking about shuttle service, in Brisbane, and as well as looking at shuttle opportunities in regards to the Baylands development. So if people want to come and ask John, and he'll have a little presentation, all are welcome.
Awesome. So I had a Home for All kickoff meeting with Councilmember Lentz, and we just they came to just hear what we would like to get out of a workshop, kind of what some of our goals are, as a community and as a council. And it seems like they're really going to tailor whatever program they create is going to be very specific to Brisbane, and really making sure that key stakeholder groups are involved and feel welcome and participate. And so we just mostly spoke really high level, but we should be meeting in the next few weeks to kind of determine a solidified date, potentially mid-March, where we could have our first workshop. So we're on the lookout for that. And then Councilmember Cunningham and I had a public art committee meeting, and I'll just really briefly fill you in on what happened there. Basically, Sangamo. Okay, so Sangamo has done this, redevelopment of their building, and so that triggered the public arts ordinance to the tune of $300,000. And so they had the opportunity to put that money in the in lieu of fund, or to because it's such a large amount, to actually select an artist and have them commission a piece, and then the public art committee is less involved in that scenario. And so they decided to go the route of picking an artist and picking a piece of art, which they did. So we got all the way to, finalized drawings of what the art piece would look like. And then because of some investor reasons, they actually decided they no longer wanted to continue their contract with that artist and instead give that money to the In Lieu of fund. So the committee met and felt that, that art piece really reflects that business, and it is located on the property of that business. And so if in the beginning we had all of that money in the In Lieu of fund, we wouldn't have necessarily picked that artist, pick that piece, or pick that location. So because of that, the Public Art Committee is now going to look at spending that $300,000 elsewhere. So we also put out an RFP for a piece of art to go on the wall along the skate park that most likely would be like a mosaic or something as you're entering town, but it really could be a mural or another piece of art. So we will be evaluating those RFPs soon, and we have an upcoming meeting next week where we're actually going to take a field trip out to the skate park and kind of look at that wall and look at the site. Just a heads up, I'm going to be having an interview with the San Jose Mercury News on Tuesday, so I just want to give everyone a heads up that that's happening. They want to do a Q&A with city officials that are in the midst of, large housing decisions, and so I think that, they'd like to just kind of gain an understanding of what's happened in Brisbane and where we see ourselves going as a community. So, hoping that goes well. I'm cautiously optimistic, but
it'll be fine. You can do.
Anyway, so that's coming up, and then Councilmember O'Connell and I had a airport noise committee. Would you like to take that over?
Sure. We met with our local citizens and discussed noise monitors, steps to move forward to get help with the departure noise that all of Brisbane is rocked by many times. And I took that data to the airport, the SFO roundtable, which was last night. And we do have, we're going to be setting up the departure subcommittee. The ground noise subcommittee has been very successful, and I'm hoping there will be a group of 5 cities that will work on the departures noise. At that meeting, the FAA came. We had asked back in November 3 questions of the FAA, and they gave some information on arrivals coming through Woodside and said that they have taken any modifications to the stick procedure completely off the table. They would not tell us why, and they would not tell us when they might revisit it. But it is a non-starter as of now. So that was a bit of a disappointment.
I feel like every meeting you have like, I have some good news and some terrible news.
Yes, well, airport noise, that committee was formed in 1982, I think. And there's a reason it's been going on forever, because it's an unanswerable question, and it will never go away, but we always have to fight it as best we can.
Yes.
So, I think I had some other meeting, but at this point I didn't bring my notes with me, so.
Well, you'll catch us
I'm
up
not
next
sure.
time.
We'll catch you the next time.
Okay, anything?
And I had a meeting with the JPA library Monday, and it was basically a status update on all the new libraries in the county. Everybody's thrilled. Everything's going very fast forward ahead, and very good outlook and very good income.
Sweet.
Sweet, definitely.
Okay, so that brings us to City Council meeting scheduled. Please note that the March 3rd goal setting workshop has been canceled, and our next meeting is scheduled for February 21st, 2019. Anything else?
No changes from last.
On that, I just wanted to give the council a heads up. I will not be able to attend the May 16th meeting.
And I am also out for that, and you've had that information for quite a long time.
So maybe we should look at maybe we can condense May to one meeting.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah, let me know.
The only issue in May that we try to get to, we could actually do it in June, is the capital improvement program.
Okay.
So we'll figure out a schedule for that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, that brings us to written communications. I have 5 million papers. Hold on, let me get my list. Okay. Got it. Thank you. All right. So we had written correspondence from Ray Miller on February 3rd, February 4th, and February 5th. Kim Folian on February 6th, February 5th, February 7th. Peter Bollier, hopefully I'm saying that right, on February 5th. Michelle Salmon on February 7th. And Joe and Jerry Sully on February 7th. So that brings us to oral communications number 2.
Actually,
that's right.
Do you want to do that later?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to do things a little bit differently than people have done in the past. Back in December, I was actually accused of a crime while acting as a city council person, so I wish to read this into the record for you. I wish to reiterate my total support of our First Amendment rights, regardless of how pleasant or vulgar or in the presence of minors. However, if I am publicly accused of a crime, then I will respond. In this case, the accusation was that I was doing business with UPC, the developer of the Baylands, which would have been a crime under relevant statutes. My response is, your statement was false. I've had no relationship with UPC other than as a Brisbane City Council person when it appears before the council. There is no document or anyone who would say differently with any evidence at all. This was wholly and truly untrue. So other people have been accused of things in the past and they've just let it slide. But this was actually tantamount to a crime that I had to respond to, and it is wholly untrue. So what I would like to see, moving forward in Brisbane is the spirit of us all working together, which is what I campaigned on. For the most part, most of us agree on most things most of the time. And sometimes it is just in the way we reach our goals that are different. That does not mean that if we disagree on a path forward that the opposing person is doing so with ill intentions. I have not found that to be the case in all the years that I've lived here and been involved with the Planning Commission, the City Council, or just as a resident. I've found our City Council to be, even though we can agree to disagree many, many times, to be extremely honest people. So I just wanted to read that into the record, just so I've said it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to oral communications number 2. Okay.
I looked on the city website today, Michelle Salmon, Brisbane resident, to look at letters to the city council, and they are no longer being posted. And it seems like the last letter that was posted was from 7/18/18. So I haven't seen any letters posted since then, and I'm wondering why. Because if letters are sent to the council, it's public information, and we were posting them for a long time, and I haven't seen any since July. So
okay. Staff want to respond to that?
No.
No. Okay.
We'll look. We'll discuss it. We'll get back to you.
Okay. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.